The super controversial Canadian psychologist got people talking again. This time, it's about the Bible. Given that JP doesn't believe in God, what he had to say about the Bible on Joe Rogan's podcast has left people astounded. Let's have a look at the shocking truths about the Bible that Jordan Peterson revealed on Joe Rogan's podcast. The Canadian psychologist has made a name for himself by voicing controversial views online at the top of his voice. While this has earned him widespread criticism, some seem to think he's not all that wrong. In fact, many religious conservatives have found truth in his words, surprisingly so given that JP himself claims that he doesn't believe in a God. Now, the best-selling author has some shocking facts to share about the Bible. What are they? Well, to start with, he claims that the Bible was the first book ever written. According to him, before the Bible, there were only scrolls and writings on papyrus. So this religious text was the various first-time pieces of writings that were put together to form an actual book. Peterson even pointed out that most other books were birthed from the Bible, which makes it an inspiration for every other book since. He described the Bible as a text upon which other texts depend, meaning it occupied a special place in displaying, setting, and perpetuating truth. This led him to stress that the Bible is not just true, but a precondition for the manifestation of truth, making it even more true. In fact, he thinks that it was the centerpiece of ideas that Western cultural knowledge was built on.
Because at one point there was only one book. Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book. And for a while, literally, there was only one book. And that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was, it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus. And
if you're wondering how he came across these thoughts, Peterson gave details about that too. He recently visited the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and found it to be a cool thing to walk through and learn about the transformational book's history. But this tour wasn't the only thing that helped him see this truth. In fact, it was his brother-in-law Jim Keller who helped him to arrive at this conclusion. He explained that some words are reliant on other words for meaning, and similarly, some ideas are reliant upon other ideas for meaning too. So the more reliant others are on this one basic idea, namely the Bible, the source becomes fundamental.
so now then you think, well, let's think about the relationship between words. Well, some words are dependent on other words. Some ideas are dependent on other ideas. The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is.
And because Peterson believes that the Bible is the first book to have been created in history, it's also reasonable to believe that everything within that book is the absolute truth. Yeah, that takes a moment to understand. Most religious folks out there will be glad to see Peterson spreading these opinions amongst his fans, but this sudden acceptance of the religion and its books is surprising to see, because it was only some time ago that he was having trouble believing in the religion whatsoever. You see, the men's rights activist has spent a lot of time thinking about the world and his beliefs. While wrestling with his prolonged illness, he had also been thinking about Christianity and decided to talk about them publicly in a podcast interview with Jonathan Pajot. Peterson said that he believed in the figure of Christ, but he also believed in the myth of Christ. He said that Christ was the union of those two things, and while he wasn't sure about it, some part of him probably believed in him. But the very idea itself was too terrifying a reality for him.
But I'm terrified he might exist. That would be a truthful answer to some degree, or that I act as if God exists, which I think is, I do my best to do that. But then there's a real stumbling block there, because there's no limit to what would happen if you acted like God existed.
In fact, he didn't even know what would happen to a person who blindly believed in the religion. He had been asked about his belief in God in the past, but had always answered in various ways, though a part of him was afraid that he actually existed, because if a person truly did believe in him, he'd probably be transformed completely. But it was hard for him to see proof of this transformation anywhere around him. Peterson explained that the Catholic Church was a good example of this. With all the corruption within it, he had no idea the true power that wholehearted belief could bring a person. And to him, Christians weren't a good example to convince outsiders of their faith.
At least the way that it's been portrayed is that with all the sexual corruption, for example, it's like, really, you believe that the Son of God, that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and yet you act that way, and I'm supposed to buy your belief. And it seems to me that the church is actually quite guilty on that account because the attempts to clean up the mess have been rather half-hearted in my estimation.
But despite his uncertainty about his own beliefs, Dr. Peterson wants to continue learning and talking about Christianity. In fact, he regularly uses examples of Christianity to back his conservative and often quite controversial remarks. As a renowned public intellectual, Professor Peterson has made waves for his confrontational style and views on gender. He firmly believes that hierarchies are an unavoidable part of human civilization and that the patriarchy, which he believes is founded on male competence, doesn't require any change. In his lectures on masculinity and personal responsibility, Peterson frequently relies on Christian morality and biblical stories. In one series of lectures, he spoke about the story of Noah and the flood as an example of how, with upstanding behavior, people could survive the chaos, and how Noah's good familial relationships allowed him to triumph over his circumstances, while Cain's lack of a grateful and inquiring posture led to his downfall, whereas Abel's contrasting temperament led to his personal and social success.
Quite interesting, it's very soon after the story of Cain and Abel when you see evil enter the world in the story of Adam and Eve, along with self-consciousness. And evil there is the ability, that's the knowledge of good and evil, that's the ability to hurt other people self-consciously, to know what you're doing. And then, of course, instantly, Cain takes that to the absolute extreme, and he uses that capacity to destroy really what he loves best. He gets as close as a human being can to destroying the divine ideal, because of course his brother is Abel, and Abel is favored by God, and Cain destroys him, which Cain tells God at the end of that episode that his punishment is more than he can bear. And I think the reason for that is, where are you once you destroy your own ideal? What's left for you? There's nowhere to go. There's no up. And when there's no up, there's a lot of down.
And while many don't agree with his views, devout Christians have also made their uneasiness with his views clear. In fact, fans of Dr. Peterson's work have had to clarify what the true purpose of the religion is and are urging Christians to fight back, because Peterson isn't just lying to the people who listen to him, he is also lying to himself. Even though he doesn't want to, he is. For one, it is completely false that the church's main purpose is to help young men. That's more important to Peterson than it is to Jesus, and it sets a great tone for the rest of his show. In his own work, it's clear that he cares most about helping young men do well in the world, and that's basically what most of his work is about. He isn't trying to think of the best way for the church to do Christ's work, but thinking about how the church can make Peterson's dreams come true, which, let's face it, sound really selfish. Christians have noticed that getting to heaven is added at the end of his lecture almost as if it were an afterthought. Again, this may show what he values most. Sure, he's using the example of biblical figures to inspire men to achieve more, but that's not even the message that Christianity preaches. In fact, it seeks to remind its believers that if you let worldly matters interrupt your spiritual growth, you'll never really succeed. In fact, these men could find the prettiest wife, raise the prettiest kids, plant the prettiest garden, build the prettiest ark, and take over every country on the planet. But at the end of the day, everyone will die and nothing will matter if you forget the purpose of the religion. Of course, as you already know, Peterson doesn't really care, or at least not yet, about what devout Christians have to say, just as he doesn't care about the criticism he receives from liberals. And of course, many looked at the logical side of the argument and wanted to look at his claims with a broader perspective. For one, Peterson referred to Christianity as the bedrock of Western culture. Then he took it even further when he revealed that a simple tour of the Museum of the Bible in Washington was enough to help him see the truth of it all. While it's surprising that a simple tour was enough to convince Peterson about the existence of God, what really shocked people was his remark that the Bible is a unifying, central foundation of knowledge, and that everything else stems from it. Simply put, there's no proof of this. Plus, it's an oversimplified view of a very complex topic. His hyperfixation of religion and myth is evident from his statements, but he's ignoring various other factors that have also helped shape our society and reality. In fact, he's so determined to ignore social, political, and historical factors that it makes him seem ignorant. In an effort to create a truth that appeals to himself, he makes blatant remarks, such as his insistence that the Bible was the first ever book when that's not true. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Book of the Dead are just two examples of books that existed before it.
Now, in many ways, the first book was the Bible. I mean, literally, because at one point there was only one book. Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book. And for a while, literally, there was only one book. And that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus. But we were starting to aggregate written text together. And it went through all sorts of technological transformations, and then it became books that everybody could buy, the book everybody could buy, and the first one of those was the Bible. And then it became all sorts of books that everybody could buy. But all those books, in some sense, emerged out of that underlying book. And that book itself, the Bible isn't a book, it's a library. It's a collection of books.
Also, what does he think about all the hidden meanings in the Bible that help Christians understand it? Does Peterson think that the book's the only way we can learn? In fact, the Bible is an unorganized book and people today still can't agree on what the official doctrine is. He's also repeatedly made it known that he feels hierarchy is fundamental and necessary to make sense of all that exists. And in an effort to make sense of the world, he really wants this central source of knowledge from which we can build. But this is not how knowledge is created. There's no clear roadmap to the knowledge we have today because there are so many outside factors that have to be taken into account. But this brings about an important question. Like many people out there, could it be that he's only turning to the Bible to fill a moral and spiritual void in his life? You see, in his previous book, Maps of Meaning, Peterson talks about how, when he was young, the church taught him how to be a Christian. He was a curious child and had questions. But the person in charge of catechism couldn't give him good answers and didn't seem to have even thought about his questions. So of course Peterson was disappointed. He gave up on Christianity because he thought it was just wishful thinking that didn't make sense scientifically or rationally, and because it was at odds with Darwinian theory. Plus, his family didn't believe in anything and no one in his town seemed to care that he stopped believing as well. But that didn't stop him from looking for answers. Peterson did a lot of soul-searching when he was in college, and it was during this time that he realized that he had the tendency to get violent, which is when he began to have scary dreams. Then there was a night when he got drunk at a party and painted an offensive picture when he got home. When he got sober, he felt upset by the picture and wondered what to do with the darkness inside of him. That's also when he started reading Carl Jung, who founded analytical psychology, and felt like he'd finally found someone who might be able to explain his dark dreams. Jung said that the experiences of one's ancestors, whose genes we share and whose stories we tell, shape our thoughts and dreams. This really struck a chord with Peterson, or at least to some extent.
And so, but I've been struck by some clients in particular how unbelievably, continually they can generate deep archetypal dreams with a really coherent narrative structure. It's really phenomenal, and how revealing those dreams are. Problem with archetypal dreams is that they're not really personal, right? So if you're looking for a personal way out of a situation, an archetypal dream doesn't help you that much because it gives you the general pattern rather than a specific solution to your problem. But a good dream will do both at once.
Peterson thought that Jung's theory of archetypes was oversimplified and in some ways wrong, but he deeply agreed with its basic ideas. That is, mythology and religion are great ways to learn about the human mind, and universal archetypes can show us how the human mind has changed over time to deal with the order and chaos in nature. Peterson's main problem with Jung is that he takes the archetypes too literally, especially when they have to do with gender. And he's not the only one who thinks this way, and if this was the only problem, it would be something that scholars could debate and correct. But the bigger problem is that he uses this wrong way of understanding Jung to justify harmful sexism that he tries to pass off as a defense of free speech and common sense.
I think Jung overgeneralized his experiences, his clinical experiences. He conceptualized the hero's journey as something that was fundamentally creative and interior. And I think that that's probably true only for people who are really high in trait openness, who are creative. And I suspect that Jung attracted a tremendously disproportionate number of creative people to his practice, given the nature of his personality and his interests.
This message, which is based on questionable data and presented as a psychological theory, resonates with a lot of young men because it gives them an easy way out of a huge problem. His answer is to reject feminism and postmodernism, or at least his version of them, and go back to traditional gender roles, which Peterson says are more based on biology than on society. And so he came to the conclusion that there are three basic archetypes: the unknown or chaos, the known or order, and the middle ground between chaos and order. And it was the job of the hero or savior, which in this case are young men, of the story to find their way between chaos and order. That's when Peterson also realized that this theme of order and chaos shows up in different cultures, religions, and times in history, and that it is the most important way to understand human lives. It can be seen in the way the Taoists put yin and yang together, the way Christians show Jesus as the narrow gate, Harry Potter's role as the seeker in the fantasy sport Quidditch, Osiris's role in Egyptian mythology, Marduk's role in the Enuma Elish, and even Pinocchio and Sleeping Beauty. Peterson observed that human stories and myths teach us to keep an order that is stable enough to give us security, but also flexible enough to change when we need to deal with something new or unexpected. But what does this theme of order and chaos mean for us as individuals, according to Peterson? It means that even if we stop believing in a God who exists outside of nature, we can still have a sense of purpose and meaning by being the hero who brings order and chaos to our own lives, our families, and our communities. We can find purpose in a sad, unpredictable, and often violent world by being responsible adults who take on meaningful tasks and give back to society. But that begins with cleaning our rooms and lives first. Now, whether any of this makes sense to you or not, you can't deny that Jordan Peterson is one of the most popular figures in the world right now, so his words definitely rang true for some out there. He has been called the most discussed North American intellectual of the Trump era, and his popularity seems to be growing. But what is it about his work that is so appealing to young men, and why has he gained such a following? One factor that contributes to Peterson's popularity is his critique of what he sees as a cultural crisis, a crisis that he argues is rooted in the decline of traditional gender roles. According to Peterson, many young men feel that something has gone wrong with our culture and they're searching for answers. Peterson offers them an explanation that feminism and postmodernism have undermined the social order, leaving young men without a sense of purpose or direction. He encourages them to reject these movements and embrace traditional gender roles, which he argues are more biologically intrinsic than socially conditioned.
When boys go to school, they're told that human beings are cancer on the planet and that we're destroying everything, and that masculine ambition and ability is the main contributor to that. And then if that doesn't work, then they're informed through junior high and high school and university that they're all part of the oppressive male patriarchy, and that it would be better if they just stayed home in their basement and stayed away from women and the world. And so that's, let's call that a demoralizing message, shall we? And leave it at that.
This message resonates with many young men who are struggling to find their place in a rapidly changing world. Peterson provides them with a sense of identity and purpose, and he frames his message as a psychological theory using academic language to make it sound reasonable. He presents himself as a calm, rational authority figure, and many young men find this reassuring. Another factor that contributes to Peterson's popularity is his ability to tap into deep-seated psychological and emotional issues. He speaks to young men's fears and anxieties, their sense of alienation and disillusionment. He offers them a sense of hope, a way to find meaning and purpose in their lives. He also talks about the importance of personal responsibility, self-discipline, and self-improvement, and many young men find this inspiring.
Well, young men, boys, are generally pilloried, let's say, harassed for their toy preferences. Boys have a proclivity to enjoy playing with gadgets and guns and weapons, toy weapons. And I read a funny article the other day, a woman who had a young boy. She had banned anything that looked even vaguely like a weapon from the house, of course, and he would run around the house trying to shoot the cat with the toothbrush. And she was appalled by that. And then when boys, and she said she threw her hands up in despair because, her boy would just stop being a boy, which is, of course, extraordinarily annoying. And then...
Now, Peterson is also skilled at using social media to reach his audience. He has a strong presence on YouTube, Twitter, and other platforms, and he uses these channels to communicate directly with his followers. He's able to create a sense of community and connection, and his followers feel like they're a part of a movement. He also encourages his followers to engage with his ideas and to share them with others, which helps to spread his message even further. One of the main reasons why Peterson is so popular with young men is that he offers them a sense of empowerment. He encourages them to take control of their lives, to be the masters of their own destinies. He talks about the importance of standing up for oneself, speaking truth to power, and taking responsibility for one's actions. Many young men find this empowering, especially in a culture that often seems to be stacked against them. And he isn't the only example. Andrew Tate, a former kickboxing champion and current self-proclaimed millionaire playboy, has amassed a huge following among young men on social media. He is known for his outlandish statements, extravagant lifestyle, and controversial views on various topics, ranging from politics to relationships. Tate's popularity can be attributed to a number of factors, including his charismatic personality, unapologetic attitude, and willingness to speak his mind on topics that many others are afraid to touch. Tate's appeal to young men stems from his message of empowerment, which encourages them to take control of their lives and not be afraid to pursue their dreams. He often talks about the importance of self-discipline, hard work, and perseverance. His own success story serves as a testament to the power of these values. His unapologetic approach to life and his willingness to speak his mind on controversial topics like masculinity, relationships, and politics also resonate with many young men who feel disenfranchised by mainstream society. And what's more, Tate's extravagant lifestyle, which includes luxury cars, designer clothes, and exotic travel, is a source of inspiration and aspiration for many of his followers. He presents a vision of success and wealth that seems attainable, and his message of living your best life is a powerful motivator for young men who feel stuck in their current situation, which is something similar to what Peterson stated and which Christians found a problem with. In a world where young, mainly white men are being forced to come to terms with the privilege that most of them are born with, Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson are making them feel better. They're informing these boys that not only is it normal that they have the upper hand over women in almost every way, but that it's the way it should be. The way people like Rogan and Peterson talk about things is also a big part of why they are so successful. They seem like smart people who are willing to sit down and listen to men's concerns. Peterson, for instance, says that his arguments are based on science and facts. Rogan may not be as smart as Peterson, but he seems like a calm listener who is open to ideas that are not popular. But underneath their carefully crafted images and easy-to-understand language, they're basically telling their audience that male dominance in history is either a cliché or the way things are meant to be, among a lot of other half-baked ideas. Peterson and others like him help spread the false idea that the world is against young men today. The crisis of masculinity is a big deal for people who work for men's rights, but this so-called crisis isn't anything new. As industrial capitalism grew in the 19th century, this crisis became a regular part of many societies. It has everything to do with the fact that patriarchal societies have strict rules that set men on a path to an impossible goal.
Know that there's a lack in us that needs to be redressed, and unfortunately that can be weaponized. And has been. And what I see happening to young men in particular, boys as well, not just young men, and maybe even, maybe starting at the age of toddlers, is that we have this sense in the world that human beings live in antagonism to nature and that we're actually a malevolent force. And that our social structures, which are clearly capable of the commission of atrocity, are fundamentally oppressive, patriarchal in their nature. And so then if you're a male in a society with that ethos, the motive force that drives you into the world to live is associated with rapaciousness, and despoliation on the natural front, and then oppression and atrocity on the social front.
Men have to be strong, aggressive, breadwinners, patriarchs, savers, protectors, and stable, among other things. There is no room to feel empathy, accept failure, be weak and vulnerable, show emotions openly and effectively, listen and understand before speaking, find out who you are, and be comfortable in your own skin. Peterson's ideas help men feel more confident about who they are, because these young men seem to feel very strongly that their privileged position in society is coming to an end, and that feminism is the main reason for this. Anyone who follows politics knows about this complaint, as it seems that most Trump voters were upset about the loss of an imagined golden age. But the deeper meaning of this insight is that postmodernism has, in fact, been a kind of death, a death of the modern, and the end of the certainty and privilege that men, especially straight white men, have had in the era that is coming to an end. Based on the ideas of philosophers like Hegel, William James, Henri Bergson, Jung, and Alfred North Whitehead, postmodernity is not just the closure of an era with no opening in sight, as Jacques Derrida would have it, but a transitional moment between worldviews, a deconstruction of modern assumptions to make room for a new way of relating. But just like any other phase transition, whether it's a revolution in science or politics, or a breakthrough or conversion experience in a person's life, the relatively stable system must reach a point of crisis so severe that it needs to be reorganized from the ground up if it wants to keep going as a living process. And that's where Peterson comes in. He continues to attract a large following, especially among young men. His message of personal responsibility, self-improvement, and traditional gender roles continues to resonate with many. And his presence on social media ensures that his ideas will continue to be heard. All that remains to be seen is whether his message will continue to gain momentum or whether it will eventually be replaced by a different vision for the future.